big crowd. Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. And as he mentioned, I was with IBM for about 15 years prior to my role with SiriusDecisions, which is now part of Forrester. Between the time that I accepted my job with SiriusDecisions and I started my job with SiriusDecisions, it was acquired by Forrester, so a lot of change in my life. But with IBM, I started working with Andrew in 2008 to help writers, especially technical writers, and in the case I was an editor of a bunch of technical consultants whose job it was to help our partners integrate their software onto our hardware platforms with IBM. So we're talking about the System I and System P and so forth. And they were not writers by trade, but they understood the subject matter so well that they were the best people to write the content. And Acrolinks was really a game changer for us. And I started using it and being an evangelist in the company in marketing, and we had a lot of results and a lot of fun with it. And it's something that I'll be talking a little bit about in this talk as well, as I'll try to tell as many stories as I can. So let's go back. So SiriusDecisions puts on a summit every year usually it's in Austin, Texas, and it's a big event. We had 3,500 people there this year, and one track of our talks was about high performance. What defines high performance for each of our 15 service areas? And I'm in the content strategy and operations service area. So the whole idea was trying to understand, using data, what defines high performance. And what we did was we analyzed all of the respondents of a big survey that we sent out. 315 marketers responded to a survey, content marketers. And in each case, we looked at the different data points in the survey, and the high performers in each of these data points became a cohort that we would then analyze. How did they do across the rest of the responses in the survey? And those that responded well across all of those different best practices, we considered to be a high-performing unit. So I'll talk about that, and we actually had two of those, and but the first one was usage. And you think content usage should just be like everybody uses the content that they write, that they develop. It's very expensive to write and develop content. It takes a lot of effort. And actually, in our survey, about 50% of the marketing content that is developed is never used, which is really startling to me, but it's true across all of these different companies, the 80 companies that responded to the survey. But there were some that did relatively well with it. And so the cohort for content usage is those that where 75% or better of their content was used externally, and 50% or better was used internally. So externally is on the website, in social channels, in all of the distribution networks that you send your content out to, and internally is primarily for the sales organization, sales enablement. So when we analyzed that cohort, there were a number of really important data points that I'll be talking about. But the point I want to make is that in each case, those data points show best practices in content governance. That the companies that govern their content well had higher content usage. And the other thing I want to say is that content usage is like, well, nobody says, I want to set out to increase my content usage. I'm just going to go do that. They say, I want to set out to increase my content usage, and what are the tactics or practices that I would do to improve my content usage over time? And these are the practices that we recommend based on our data. And I just explained the methodology, basically building a cohort of high performers and then looking at the different data points. So I'll just get right into the data. But before I do that, these are the priorities for our practice for content strategy and operations at SiriusDecisions. We have strategic content planning, which is just basically the strategy part of content strategy. We have content management, and technology, which is sort of the operations part of content strategy and operations. We have the content factory, which most companies have an internal agency that creates a lot of the content that they produce. And then we have this operations functional design and development, which is all about the people who do the work, and upskilling and making sure you fill all the gaps in skills. And the data points that we're going to be talking about are on these three. So as I go along, I'll say this is a strategic content planning data point, or this is a content management technology data point. So the first one is 76% of high-performing content teams consistently use the best practice inputs in their content planning as they go along. So again, 76% of the people who had high content usage by our definition use these best practice inputs. And the best practice inputs are all about the audience and really basically what I'll just get to it, the persona, journey mapping, all of the things that if you plan your content well, you're going to tend to use it better. And what we have here is a client story. SAP Concur built this playbook, and the playbook used really the foundation of active content governance. It used a collaborative, sort of cooperative system to take inputs from all of the stakeholders of the playbook and to build this playbook that everybody could then agree on were the important things that they would have to ensure. These are the sort of table stakes for any kind of content that goes through the system. So the second one, and this is a really interesting one because I mentioned we had two cohorts that were high performers. The one that I really wanted to focus on was this one, that high performing teams use SEO keywords throughout the content lifecycle. And that was the first one that we discovered, and actually, you can look at the different data points that I'll be talking about, and there's high correlation between all of them. But this is one where if you use SEO keywords throughout the content lifecycle, you're basically making your content audience-centric by design. And in so doing, then it's going to have especially high external usage because basically the SEO keywords are the signal that you use to understand your audience. What are the things that they care about? What are the things the ways that they express their interests and their desires in language? And building content is all about trying to write for the audience so that the audience can understand it. And then eventually you can condition the conversation from audience language to whatever your corporate voice is, but you can't do it the other way around very, very effectively. So we think of it as the input for planning, publishing, or production, publishing, and promotion, the 4 Ps of content. And a lot of companies think of SEO keywords in terms of something to do after the fact to optimize your content for the audience after you've already written it. And we think that that's sort of taking it a backwards approach, that you really want to understand the audience before you start writing the content. And if you do that at a fairly deep level, you'll produce, publish, and promote your content in better ways. And as far as the promotion part, it's all about understanding the channels that the content is going to be sent out to, or in some cases, these are inbound channels, and aligning the messages and the language, the discrete language in those different inbound channels, especially to the language of the audience. So this is a client story, Thomson Reuters, which in this case, Thomson Reuters is a huge company, but they have a legal, it's called Find Law, a legal arm that is basically, it's a giant search engine for legal precedent is the way I would describe it. And they use a tool called Muse, which some of you might be familiar with. But basically what Muse does is it analyzes all the content on the web, and it doesn't just look at Google, but it looks at all the content on the web, and it uses artificial intelligence to try to understand what are the themes and topics that are most popular. And then when you see these themes and these popular themes and topics, what are the words that are proxemic to those themes and topics. So it clusters those words with the big themes and topics, and ultimately builds sort of like knowledge graphs of the different themes and topics based on keyword usage. And with this tool, you can use it in planning and building briefs, and then Acrolinks is a partnership where you can actually have it embedded in an instance of Acrolinks to give writing assistance on the keywords that they should use. And a lot of the keywords that the traditional way of thinking about SEO is that it's all about volume. That the number of queries a month in a particular market is how you would determine whether a keyword is important or not. And what Muse has shown is that, yes, that's important, but the way to put that into practice is actually using a lot of low-volume keywords that have long tail, that basically are long tails, not that necessarily longer keywords, phrases, but that there isn't a lot of volume on them. But they're the semantic signals that show that a piece of content would be authoritative or not based on the use of these keywords. And there's no other tool, I think, that does that sort of analysis. Here's another view of it, basically, of the words, the phrases that, in this case, you would need to have in this legal document that somebody's writing to make it an authoritative piece that would ultimately be used at a high rate in the market, both in terms of search and in terms of other channels like social. Oh, and before I get on to the next here, let me go back. So I mentioned that the SEO keywords was one of the cohorts, so there was a number of other best practices, and I have a blog post that I can maybe share with the people afterwards. That uses this the use of SEO keywords throughout the content lifecycle as a signal of high performance, and all the different things that those organizations did in their content. And one that I won't be talking about here that I wanted to call out is the use of a universal taxonomy. So if teams that have a high use of SEO keywords have a universal taxonomy, and we define a universal taxonomy as a lot of companies have taxonomies for various different things in all these different organizations. And what a universal taxonomy does is it ties them together, integrates them, so that organizations can speak with one voice at that level of tagging and metadata management. Okay. So the next point, we asked whether companies used a global master content calendar, and companies in this high-performing segment were twice as likely to use a global master content calendar. And by global master content calendar, we mean that everybody who touches content in an organization has at least read-only access to it. They don't necessarily have the ability to write to a content calendar, but at least everybody understands what content is in development, what content is in the market, where is it in the market, and those sorts of things. It's increasingly important. We have this concept of the CMP, the content marketing platform, where these calendars come to life, and it's like the fastest growing software platform in marketing is the content marketing platform. And it's a best practice because there's a lot of ways that you can use it besides just giving visibility to content. And this is an example. This is NewsCred, which is one of the leading content marketing platforms. You can use it for all different kinds of content. In this case, this happens to be the CEO's use of the content for the SiriusDecisions conference and all the different things that they have to produce for a conference booth. So you don't even think about, well, pieces of content at a content booth, but it's little chunks of content that they have to produce and manage in a coordinated way. And the calendar gives them not only visibility, but a sort of a reasoning, a logic to how they would do that. And there's different views. This is a monthly view. The previous one was a weekly view. But the point is that you have people who are responsible for managing the content, for ensuring that the content is out there to the right people at the right time, And then you have people who actually have to understand that from at a deeper level and actually produce the content. And they need to look in the calendar and see, what are my tasks for the day and so forth. And I believe, Andrew, Acrolinks has budding partnerships with some CMPs, or it's an area of focus for Acrolinks. So the next one is high performers are 44% more likely to use advanced analytics segmentation. And advanced analytics segmentation is basically using a variety of different ways of understanding your content and tagging your content so that you can manage it better. So we talk about audience and journey stage and you might say product. You want to have a way of associating the topics that you're writing about to the products that they relate to. You might want to understand how audiences relate to the topics that they're interested in. And there's a whole lot of ways of connecting these different segments so that you can run analytics and understand who are you reaching, how effective is your content for those audiences, and ultimately where do you have room for improvement, and where can you manage it. I did mention in this deck that the universal taxonomy is the way that you govern these advanced analytic segmentations. But it's also, you have to work across a lot of different organizations to make sure that your analytics are working well. One of basically the analytics people are not writers, they're not content people typically, they're numbers people. And the content people in this room and the content people that I work with are the integrators of all these different functions. It's kind of interesting how you have to, even though I think a lot of writers are sort of introverted and like to spend time quietly writing something, they end up in these kinds of roles being the connection points, the glue that binds the different organizations. And analytics is one of the ways. You can't really do anything in a large organization without being able to prove that it's effective, that it's working, and if it isn't working, that you have a plan for improving it. And analytics is the way this is done. And the thing that I did want to point out that is a little different from what I gave at Summit is that Acrolinks is itself a great analytics platform in the sense that it has this ability to pull in metrics from different systems and sort of be an integration point in this process. And then the dashboards that you create within it then can actually be delivered down to whatever level of practitioner that you need to deliver it to. Whereas in a traditional business intelligence application like Marketo or whatever, you have to have special access to Marketo. You have Marketo over here, you have your content over here, you're trying to make correlations and draw insights back and forth, and it becomes difficult. Acrolinks gives you that ability right in your content planning and management systems. The next one is something that probably the people in this room might feel especially connected to. It's not something that is done well in marketing, but 72% of the people who responded that they had high content usage used modular content in their content production. So by modular content we're talking about basically not having one big monolithic PDF or page or whatever, but all the different chunks. And when you think about DITA as an example of a technology that allows you to manage content in different discrete, write once, publish many times, reuse, and so forth, all of those kinds of things that modular content does. I think TechCom is the place where this innovation is strongest, but we're trying to bring it over to marketing with, I would say, mixed results. But what it does for marketing is you can have a lot of different use cases, but one that is particularly important to marketing is that the brand, that the language that you use in your brand, that is, you don't want to have multiple versions of the same thing out there that are not, that basically evolve over time in different ways in different places. You want to have one piece of content about a particular thing that is then used in multiple ways. To your point with the rideshare app, that's the principal benefit of modular content. besides the fact that you don't have to produce the content multiple times, you just produce it once. And these are the ways that, and at least for marketing, that we try to think about chunking things up. And I'll tell a story about the boilerplate. It might seem like a pretty simple thing, but at IBM we had this problem where we had, for product pages, we had 120 different countries that we published the same product page into. And so there might be 35 countries that were English-only product pages. And Google has this thing called where it goes through and it de-indexes all the things that seem like duplicates. And so we had these important product pages, and Google de-indexed all of the English language pages for them, except for the ones from, I think it was Bahamas or something. And so the offering managers, we call offering managers, they're product managers, who are really interested in seeing how what the Google experience is like for their products, would Google the name of the product, and they would get the Bahamas page and in the U.S. and of course then they scream bloody murder, and it's a fire drill, and the fire drill, when we got through it, boilerplate was one of the biggest things that caused Google to actually de-index our content, because we had, it's like a I don't know, 70-30 rule or something like that. If more than 70% of content on 2 pages is the same verbiage, it's going to de-index one of those 2. And all we had to do was change the way that we coded the boilerplate, so that I hide it in JSON or something, so that Google's indexer couldn't see that. And then we got over the 70% threshold. And that's how we were able to get all our pages re-indexed. And the same for what happens for boilerplate you could use for many different things on your pages to ensure the same sort of issue. I mean, a lot of calls to action, a lot of even just headings and titles and so forth. You can use modular content for variation as well as for consistency. And the last one is all about service level agreements. And this is, I think, another critical part of when we talk about active content governance. Service level agreements are all about ensuring that different organizations within a company have shared expectations and understanding of what will be produced at what time and in what according to what minimum quality standards there are. And those that had high content usage, a lot of them used the service level agreements. It makes sense, because if you don't have those in place, you end up trying to use things that are suboptimal, and it doesn't get found or used externally, and then basically you have that problem of producing stuff that never gets used. And this is all about the content factory part of the equation. That if you have an organization, in the case of tech docs, you have organizations that just create your knowledge center or whatever, and that is a factory of people producing content. And having all the organizations that are stakeholders for those people understand and use that same sort of principle of service level agreements is the best practice. This is an example that we had from another part of SAP, where they had they used an SLA for not just for what was produced, but for the actual workflow of the content, so that every step of the way you could say this is meeting the agreement or not, and it was actually quite effective in ensuring that everything that got produced was done according to this agreement. So these are the metrics. I'm hoping that we'll have time for some questions. I kind of breezed through this fast so that we could kind of do an Ask Me Anything kind of round.
We still have a lot of time.
Good. High-performing content teams, 76% more likely to use the best practice inputs in their content planning. And high-performing content teams use SEO keywords. It's one of the critical inputs to not just planning, but production, publishing, and promotion. High performers are twice as likely to use this global master content calendar. So you can think about the plan manifests itself in a calendar. The calendar then is the master document for the organization to understand what everybody is supposed to be doing and how that workflow is supposed to work. And if there are things that are going wrong with that workflow, and alerts are sent out, and troops are marshaled to get the workflow going. And most importantly, I think for that, by the way, is that a lot of companies exist in this series of silos. They don't even know what one silo might not know what the other silo is doing, and so they just sort of naturally create duplicative content. And then ultimately, when you have all these apparent duplicates out there, a lot of them don't get used. If you're looking in a repository, let's just say it's a sales enablement repository for content, and you're a salesperson and you want to make a sales presentation out of what's there, and there are 10 things that are apparently the same, you're going to look at other factors of which one should I use for the client. And a lot of times it's like might be usage metrics or whatever. So one thing bubbles up to the top to get used, and the 9 things just sit there and stagnate and don't actually do anything. So having one piece of content for each audience segment, stage in the journey, or whatever task that they have to create, and topic, or major topical area, one piece of content for each of those, and it still ends up being a lot of content, but at least you don't have a lot of duplication that's getting in the way. Oh, and the other thing about duplication is that I mentioned how Google will de-index. It doesn't just affect the indexing. It also it might index 2 pieces of content that are close enough where it'll say, okay, well, you can have both of these things in our index, but only one is going to rank for that word, and so you're basically competing with yourself when you have duplication in Google. And then the high performers are 44% more likely to use the advanced analytics segmentation. As I mentioned, that's all about having a universal taxonomy that tags these things for audience, journey stage, topic, product, all the different values that your company needs to track your content according to. And then modular content is a critical one. And for modular content, again, it's easy enough to actually code these pieces and tag them for the different contextual places where they will live. The harder thing, and I think tech doc people really understand this at a higher level than marketing people do typically, but the harder thing is the writing of those modular pieces. Like writers, especially marketing writers, creative writers, they really want to write all the transitions in. They want to write something end to end. They want to tell a story that all hangs together, all the different pieces hang together. They don't want to write these little discrete chunks and then have somebody else assemble them on the other end and have to put in those transitions for them. So for us in marketing, the reason why I think marketing really struggles with the modular content piece is getting the writers to accept the idea of it, of portable pieces that can be used and reused in multiple different contexts. And then the service level agreements, which I think in marketing it's especially important because we have a lot of agencies that write for us, and like at IBM, we had an agency that wrote a lot of U.S.-centric content, and we had to go to market with this content all over the world. For example, there was this case where we had content that, it might have been translatable, but the concept itself was not translatable. It was when we first rolled out Blade servers, and they're so easy. You just swap them in, swap them out, hot swap them, and it's so easy. It's like driving up to a drive-up window for a hamburger. And As you imagine, there are places in Europe where this just like what is a drive-up window, you know? So you go out to market with a marketing campaign like this, and Italy is like, what is a drive-up window? And so yeah, if it wasn't for the service level agreement, this you know, we would have been SOL, because the agency you know, would have just said, well, we produced the content, you know, you have to redo it. But because we were able to go back to the agency and say, you know, the part of the service level agreement was that it actually be translatable concepts and, you know, localizable and things, we had them redo the whole campaign, and we didn't have to pay for it. And just a little plug for content strategy and operations, and what we do at SiriusDecisions. So we have these models, and one of these models is what we call the scope of content strategy and operations. I wish I had a visual of it, but it basically shows end to end what a content process, what are the critical components of a content process, and then it has people judge their maturity on these different parts of the content process. And then we're able to tailor our recommendations and advice based on their maturity level. I think a lot of analyst firms will say, here's the best practice, and if you're, for example, I just did a talk on taxonomy at Summit, in which I talked about IBM, the way that we used artificial intelligence to manage taxonomy at IBM, and many of the people in the audience were like, yeah, but what if we don't have artificial intelligence and we can't really do that? How do we get started with where we're at in our organization for taxonomy? And so, okay, well, we'll talk about exactly what you know, if you're at the very lowest levels in the taxonomy development, you know, what are the best practices for you? So at different levels of maturity, there's going to be different things that you need to do to advance your mission. And that's really kind of the signature way that SiriusDecisions works. And then we always consult on a lot of different things, but the one that I bring to the practice that wasn't there before is this whole idea of building an SEO keyword universe, which is sort of a knowledge graph for all of the keywords that an organization needs to understand and use, and it helps govern the keywords. So like you might have, in IBM we had 13 business units, and we were able to understand how to align keywords to business units so that different business units owned different segments of our keyword universe, and they weren't all cannibalizing each other and competing with each other for paid search, social, mentions, and organic. They could each have their sort of swim lanes of keywords that they could work on. But at the same time, there was one universe of them, so that if they needed to collaborate and connect on certain key topics or develop cross-linking relationships with each other, they could do that as well. And the other thing that we advise on is about using, not just talking about content performance, but talking about the actual workflow, measuring the workflow, measuring where are the bottlenecks. And this is, I think, another part of where Acrolinks is a critical component to this, because you have, at least admins have dashboards that can say, here are the people who are working well, here are the people who are struggling. You can go and intervene and help those people who are struggling. You can reward the people who are doing well. You can build incentives and things in the process, because you're measuring the workflow, and then you can overlay the performance. You can show people, look, if your workflow is going well, you're going to have higher performance, because here are the correlations between those two different metric systems. This is part of what advanced analytic segmentation gives you. It gives you an ability to correlate different data points to understand how your content is actually performing, not just with the audience, but internally in your processes. And then, you know, as I mentioned in the first bullet point about maturity, part of the challenge, probably the biggest challenge that we have with new clients, is where do I start? This is such a huge problem. How do I get going? And And so, again, we focus on building a phased approach, trying to use a little bit more agile methodologies in terms of chunking the work up into small components that can be tested and iterated on, as opposed to trying to do the whole thing in one big waterfall process and ultimately, unfortunately, failing in the process. So those are some of the things that we do at SiriusDecisions to help content teams transform. And that's my talk. I'm happy to take whatever questions you have, and hopefully ask me anything.